everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Joe Torrey. I'm an investment counselor here with RealWealth Network. And in keeping with our annual Halloween tradition, we're going to talk today about investor horror stories. And the theme for today is going to be multifamilies, 2 to 4 units, because a lot of our investors are buying those now. And so we're getting some experience about some pitfalls that you can avoid. Let's see. First, some housekeeping. Our usual disclaimer, the strategies mentioned in this presentation may not be appropriate for everyone. Other options not mentioned may be more suitable for your specific circumstances. You should always consult your personal accountant, tax advisor, or attorneys to discuss your specific situation. And past performance is no guarantee of future results. Real estate purchases are subject to investment risks, including the possible loss of amounts invested. And while we make every effort to maintain accurate and current information, the possibility of errors and updates always exists. Now, today is purely an educational webinar. There's no shameless self-promotion, no properties for sale, nothing like that. But still, we like to have this disclaimer so you know you should always do your due diligence. Okay, our agenda for today. First, we'll talk about the presenters, myself and my partner in crime there. Then we'll talk about some investor horror stories related to multifamilies and what investors can do to protect themselves. And then we'll wrap it up, summarize it, and then hopefully have some time for Q&A. If you look at your dialog box in the upper right-hand corner, you should see a orange rectangle. If you click on that, you can open up the box and type in your questions as we go along. And at the end, we'll try to catch as many of them as possible. All right, most of you know me. Like I said, my name is Joe Torrey. I'm here in the Silicon Valley area. I used to work in high tech and I was investing in real estate on the side since 2004 and decided I like real estate a lot better. So I left and been working for RealWealth Network for over 4 years now. Brian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. My name is Brian, and I've been working with RealWealth for 7 years now. So very grateful for that. We have a lot of great clients and lots of interest in our continuing growing business. I've been in single family investments for 25 years, and throughout that quarter of a century, I have done quite a bit of multifamily, primarily multifamily up to 4 units, because I love the single family financing that up to 4 units offers. And I have owned some larger apartment buildings. Definitely not my expertise. My expertise is in the single family, and most importantly, the 2 to 4 units, which Joe and I will talk about a lot today. So excited to honored to be included in the educational webinar. Thanks for having me.
So just by way of background, your property management company does single families and multifamilies. How many units do you have under management? Do you know?
They broke 2,000 doors
Wow.
in the last year. So to be candid with you, I just say 2,000 plus.
And do you have any idea how many of those are multifamilies, like 2 to 4 units?
It's a great question. If I had to guess ratios, I could get those analytics from my team. Probably somewhere around 20 to 30% would be multifamily.
Wow. Okay, well, that's quite a bit of experience. We'll hope to tap into that today.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into some multifamilies, horror stories. All right, let's start with an easy one. This is actually a client of mine, Steve L. He bought a duplex, and after closing, he found out he was responsible for some common area expenses like lawn care, snow removal, water, that were not on the pro forma. And this cost an extra $150 a month, and it ate into his cash flow. So it's not quite a horror story. It's not catastrophic, but it's still a surprise. So Brian, what can investors do to protect themselves from this?
Yeah, it's great scenario, great question. I would say ask as many questions as possible on the way in. To be candid, the provider or seller, depending on how that property was acquired, should always disclose all of those fixed expenses, which in that scenario there would be. We do a lot personally of infill lots in multifamily, so there is no HOA. So there's different scenarios. I mean, every municipality has different rules, regulations, how some expenses are covered by tenants, some are covered by owners. I think it's just a disclosure issue there. I think that the easiest way to mitigate that becoming a nightmare for people is to ask a lot of questions up front. What am I not seeing? Is there anything that's not disclosed on the pro forma that I should be aware of, whether it's a fixed or a variable expense, right? A snow removal is a variable expense because if it doesn't snow, then it's not an expense, right? So I think you need to know not only the fixed expenses, but the variable expenses.
And sometimes the software, the canned software packages that are used to produce the pro forma may not be designed for multifamily, so they might miss some of these. So the bottom line for investors is to do your own due diligence, whether it's existing or new construction, find out what you're going to be liable for covering.
Yeah, and an easy way, Joe, there is to interview the property management before you go to close because they're the ones that are going to know,
Right.
maybe even some expenses depending on who you're buying it from, that the seller's not even aware of. I know that sounds crazy, but that's a reality.
Okay. So let's go to our next scenario, the slumlord next door. So what happened, an investor bought a fourplex on the street of fourplexes, which is kind of typical because of zoning laws. You typically have a street full of apartments and fourplexes or single families. He took care of his property, but his neighbor next door was a slumlord. He allowed his property to deteriorate. There was junk on the lawn, weeds, bicycles, nothing, didn't take care of it. And that affects you. You know, if you have a nice property, but the guy next door is not taking care of his, that affects the quality of tenants that you can attract and what kind of rents you can command. So for you do mostly new developments. How do you mitigate this issue?
Yeah, so I've dealt with this again over the last 25 years. I mean, I can say humbly, I've probably dealt with most potential nightmares or issues in the business, and I can talk about a couple different experiences. Primarily, we are in new construction, Joe, like you mentioned now, so it's more of a non-event for us. But in the many cases in the last 25 years where I have dealt with that, some of the listeners might think I'm crazy for what I'm about to say, but depending on the extent of the problem next door, I'll go and fix it myself while I have my crews. I make friends with the neighbor. The first thing I do when I close on the property, I mean, if it's really rough, I probably shouldn't be buying the property next door because that's an indication of the neighborhood or the street, right? But if it's just some deferred maintenance, cosmetic stuff, which we all deal with, I don't care if you're in a really high-end neighborhood or just a starter neighborhood, I will actually go and knock on the neighbor's door very, very passively, maybe with a bottle of wine in my hand and say, hey, just want to introduce myself. I just bought the house next door and we're going to be fixing it up. I'm going to have some landscape and some crews here. Would love to offer to, and you got to be careful how you verbalize it, right? You don't want to offend the people. Would love to, give you a free lawn cut just to be a friendly neighbor, or, I mean, even just paint the front of the house. I've gone as far as painting the front of the house next door. And I know, again, for the listeners, that might sound crazy, but for $500 to $700 just to paint the front of the house, to give it some curb appeal, to me, it's a no-brainer. It's money well spent because if my property sits for 1 month and it's a quad, it's going to cost me a lot more than $500 or $700, right? So you have to just be unemotional about it and try and be a good neighbor and approach them.
Does that spoil them? Do they expect you to maintain stuff after that?
No, I'm pretty clear that, hey, I'm buying this property next door. If it's a fixer, then it's that property that I'm buying is distressed, right? So I think that it doesn't shock them because the fact of the matter is that the house that I'm buying next door needs some work as well. So you just try to present it passively and as a good neighbor and just do a good deed. And for, I said $500 to $700 to paint the front of a house, which is a reality. A lot of times for $50, you can send a laborer over there and, clean up any trash or cut the grass for them for free, maybe plant some fresh plants or some mulch so for a couple $100, it's pretty amazing how much you can clean up a house in a couple hours,
Hmm. And what about for the new multis that you're building now?
Yeah, and that's the note that we have here, and that is a tip that I teach. And so in our new construction multifamily, and this holds true in single family as well, we do a minimum 24 months exclusive property management agreement with who we work with as property managers. And what that does is mitigate a lot of things, because if you allow for the investors to use their own property management, one, just a random, they call in the yellow pages and get somebody in there, do the management themselves, or have their cousin that lives in the same city do it. The problem with that scenario is you're going to have three different quality control or screening processes for the tenants that are going to be moving in there. So by putting a simple 24-month exclusive management agreement in place for your building in that area, then that excludes, having way too many people and too many cooks in the kitchen, and allowing for, different types of screening processes. So we do that to, number one, have quality control. It protects our investment as the builder developer. And then it also, more importantly, protects you as the investor, because you're going to have a very similar streamlined process to screen your tenants.
All right, what happens after 24 months? Does the neighborhood go to hell, or?
I mean, from my experience, no. From my experience, I would say we maintain and keep a board managing 95% of our clients. The reality is our investors are busy professionals that are, out of the area. Can there be an outlier and someone decides, hey, I want to save a couple $100 a month and I'm going to manage it myself? Yes. I don't have a magic wand for that one, Joe, but I think that if the management company is doing the job that they're supposed to, then they're going to stay in place, right? Because who wants to be in the property management business? I mean, I've owned property management companies. I've been doing this for 25 years. I sub it out now. I focus on the investment. The money's in the deal. It's not in the management. So I let them do what they're good at.
Okay, and as you said, for an existing property, you always look at the whole street, not just the property you're buying.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
everything's dilapidated, then you shouldn't be buying in that street to begin with.
Yeah, during these COVID times, a lot of our investors aren't flying out to visit the properties. So what we're doing a lot of is virtual tours, where they just take a camera and videotape not only the property room by room, but also the up and down the street. Look at what the neighborhood looks like. Do people take care of their properties? Are there nice cars, not clunkers? What's the properties on either side look like? So that helps mitigate that risk by doing a video tour.
Totally agree. We have that virtual tours of all of our properties.
Okay, and finally, some metros like Cleveland have a very aggressive city inspection process. They have what's called a POS system in certain neighborhoods, and the POS inspectors drive through the neighborhoods and they cite landlords who don't maintain standards. So the landlord can be fined, and then the fines are added to their taxes, and if they don't fix the problem and pay the fine, they can eventually be foreclosed on. That's kind of an exception. I don't know of many metros that do that. Chicago and Cleveland are two markets where we have multifamilies, and Cleveland's the only one I know that has this kind of system. But that's something for investors to keep in mind.
Yeah, and Joe, just so you know, all of the markets that we're building and investing in Florida have that same process. If something is deferred, then you're going to. Oh yeah, absolutely. If the lawn, it's the tenant's responsibility, and 9 times out of 10 to take care of the lawn. Definitely in the single family world. In the multifamily, it depends on if there's an HOA or not. But if something's not being maintained, the neighbors are usually calling the city, and they will come out and cite them, and then it gets resolved that way. So it's the same with us.
Okay, good deal. And again, this issue and the one before it are kind of unique or specific to multifamilies. When you're in a neighborhood of single family homes where everybody owns their home and has pride of ownership, people tend to take care of their own house, but tenants don't take care of a property the same way a homeowner would. So in a rental neighborhood, like where you have a street full of fourplexes, you can have these kinds of issues that you wouldn't necessarily have with a single family.